You're tuning into the Table of Redemption podcast. This is our series, At the Table with the Masters. And I am your host and podcast founder, Rasheen Jamison-Richardson. This episode features a book talk with my special guest, Gunnar Branson, the author of Chasing Lights and CEO of AFIRE. A former actor, writer, teacher, and director, Mr. Branson wrote 6 plays for theater and radio in the 1980s and performed on stage, television, and radio. In the 1990s, he stepped back from the arts to make a living. He had leadership roles with GE Capital Real Estate and Heller Financial, and has consulted companies such as Jones Lang LaSalle, Wells Fargo, Brightwood Capital, CIBC, and Fidelity on innovation, product development, and marketing strategies. He is currently the CEO of AFIRE, an association for international real estate investors focused on commercial property in the United States. He is a frequent speaker for the universities and professional groups on television and with TED Talks. Tonight, you will hear his amazing journey as we feature his book, Chasing Lights. Gunnar, thank you so much for joining me at the Table of Redemption podcast. It is such an honor to have you here. Your work on Chasing Light is such a magnificent body of work for this time that we're in with crisis across the globe. I wanted to have you here because your work to me seems more like humankind. It's more like human first leadership, and it's giving us a good insight into everyday, what I consider a memoir, you might not, but it's giving us a place of pause. And so having you here today is giving life to me personally as the host of this podcast. And I know it's going to give light to so many people that are listening. And before we get into your book talk, you just tell me, so Gunnar, what brings you to the table of redemption?
Well, I think more than anything else is the invitation from you. I think we've talked about this before, but I find it kind of interesting that we are confronted with all sorts of opportunities to do things if we're able to say yes, if we're able to see them there. I think we overlook so easily opportunities for change and new exciting things and learning other people and opportunities to connect. It's just so important. So the fact that you invited me to this table, I'm pleased to be here.
Well, you accepted, and I think you're just an exceptional person that I just want more people in my community to see this in action, because to me, just our small encounter, which we'll talk about later, it did something for my soul. And it's not often that you can run across individuals in such sometimes crowded spaces or sometimes prominent spaces that can make you feel human and seen. And that's what you did for me. And I needed you to be here because through this podcast, I believe millions of others are going to have that same encounter. I want to get into what I think is in what I call the digestive system of Chasing Light, which is resilience. This podcast is based on the leadership redemption framework that I created during my time at Harvard. So I'm a 2025 Harvard alumni. But one of the things I did there was frame up how a person is resilient and how they can come into the cycle of transformation and keeping their resilience at the forefront. Can you give us your definition, your personal definition of how you define resilience?
Well, resilience is an interesting term and a difficult one to define in a lot of ways. And part of where I find difficulty is that there's a tendency for people to ascribe resilience to a single event that people get back from. So the idea that you're knocked down and you get back up again. And that's true. That's part of resilience. If something goes wrong, being able to go forward. But I think resilience goes a little bit deeper than that it's more of a more of a mindset, more of an idea that the being knocked down is as valuable as the getting back up.
Mm.
And that's difficult to do. It's difficult to understand even the idea of, well, wait a minute, something happens to me that I don't enjoy, that hurts me, that causes me harm, perhaps. How is that a positive? How is that something that leads to resilience? It's difficult, but I think it's very real. And one of the things that I like pointing to is the Japanese art of kintsugi,
Yeah.
which is this idea that, and this has been around for hundreds of years, someone breaks a pot. What do? Or a vase. You repair it if you can. And quite often in the Western world, when we repair something, we want the seams to go away, for us not to be able to see where the break
Yeah.
is, for it to be as good as new. But the point of kintsugi is that the seams are done in gold so that you can see in high relief where the pot was broken, but now where there is a permanent scar. And within that is beauty.
Mm.
So the idea being that the harm, the difficulty, the things that don't go the way we planned, the things that hurt us, in of themselves are valuable, are things to be cherished, to be worn lightly. Yes, I have scars, but that's part of what makes my life the way it is right now. That's part of what brings me wisdom and intelligence and ability to do things. So a lot of what I've talked about in Chasing Lights is that scar tissue and how it develops and how it becomes something quite valuable in terms of understanding the world around you.
That is amazing. The scar tissue component is a great analogy because it's something we can actually feel, whether it is internal or external. When we have wounds, there are external scars that tell you right there, you can see it on someone that that was a scar. But then there's some that are on the inside that may never surface, and we're still walking around with some form of scar tissue. Now, when we look at the entrance of your book, most people would want to delve straight into when you talked about you watched your wife, your daughter, and I think your cat all drive away. Can you give us that journey, but in such a way that we can see it happening in our own lives, but then getting over it? So can you open us up a little bit more with what that means? And while we have you at the table, give us a little bit more of what that was for you.
So I think there are moments in our lives where the unexpected happens, or something really large happens that is it's a wake up to a certain extent. We thought something was going in one direction, and then suddenly it's not. It's going in a completely different direction. That afternoon was really hard, certainly. It was pretty awful. Um, and it was in the middle of COVID. So it was a very surreal time in a lot of ways. We'd all been under an amazing amount of stress. And there was a kind of quietness and a kind of isolation that everyone felt. To be in a neighborhood in a city and not really hear signs of life from people, certainly signs of life from the environment around me, the birds, the fluttering of the leaves. It was one of those steamy August days when, you're preparing for a thunderstorm and it's hot. And, it's one of those really kind of strange times where everything is pregnant with change, that it's going to change quite a bit. So the environment was actually lined up with what I was experiencing personally in so many ways. You can't, if you wrote that in fiction, no one would believe it, right? Oh, that's some sort of Hollywood thing. But actually, life does do that, where things kind of line up, and they, especially when you look back at them, you go, "Wow, how is it that all those things were happening at the same time, both internal as well as external?" At the end of the day, it became this marvelous kind of moment where all the noise stopped.
Mm.
And I was in an environment of absolute silence, not just that moment in the alley watching a car drive away, but, for months and months afterwards, where I was kind of in a kind of a limbo of not knowing what it meant, who I was, where things fit in, a moment where even, outbursts of emotion um, uh, were surprises when they happened because there was a general sense of numbness. It was a kind of reset, if you will, that quiet reset that happens. So throughout the book, certainly throughout my experience, I was in a moment of reset, and part of that moment was looking back and writing. And part of the writing was very much these are stories that I've told my whole life. One of the things that's kind of fun when you come from a place that people think is exotic, or a place that a lot of people haven't been to, is that it's a very easy tool for when you're in awkward social situations. If people find out you're from Alaska, then you get to tell stories about Alaska, and everyone's instantly entertained,
Hmm.
and they think, "Wow, you're an interesting person." And that happens, for whatever period of time before they grow tired of this new toy and they move on to something else. But over the years, I had honed those stories. I had told them over and over again. And frankly, I was getting to the point that I found them kind of dull because I had told them over and over and over again. And to go back and write them, and a friend suggested that I do that. Um, Part of what I tried to do was to be as honest as possible about what my memory was and where things were. And in the process of re examining these stories, I started finding, I don't know, redemption sounds pretty dramatic, right? It sounds kind of like something that, there's a swelling of the string section behind you in
Uh-huh.
terms of redemption. That's not what my experience was. It was quieter. It was slower, realizing what it was, but along the way, both through the revisiting of older stories, but also through experiencing where I was in this point of stasis, there were several moments where light revealed itself to me,
Mm.
almost as a guidepost or as a reminder. Okay, you're lost, you're in limbo, but there is still light that you need to reach for. It's still there, and it echoed the experiences I had even as a 10-year-old boy.
Mm.
It echoed experiences I had growing up. It's not the same. I'm certainly not a 10-year-old boy, although I may feel that way sometimes. I'm an old guy. How does that translate? And that's, I think, a big part of both the experience I had writing it and the experience I think that some people have had, told me that they've had, reading it or experiencing it, is kind of nothing I went through was particularly notable or something that would rate big drama. If you want big drama, I guess listen to true crime or something. It wasn't that, but it was profoundly moving for me and hopefully for others. Think about the biggest changes in the world, say the erosion of a mountaintop
Mm.
or the movement of the sea. It's very slow, the changes. I mean, one of the problems we have with climate change is it's slow. It's hard for us to see how much things are changing because in most places it's not very fast. In Alaska, it was easy to see because so much changed so dramatically in a very short period of time. At the poles, you can feel and see climate change up front very, very clearly. And we could see it even back in the 80s. But down here, it's been slower. So we have a hard time with that. Things were happening quietly and slowly, the same way that over time, something as gentle as the rain can bring down a mountain range.
Oh.
That's part of what was happening, I think, with me. Not as big, obviously, not as dramatic as a mountain range disappearing, but certainly things were happening. I was being worn down by life. The the facades that had been building up over decades were stripped away. And so there was something else underneath it that I hadn't really looked at for a long time. And I would argue this is a blessing. This
Mm.
is a blessing that, if you're lucky, you get to have. A
Wow.
blessing where you start to realize, no, not only did you not get there, whatever there was supposed to be, You'll never get there. And you are not a finished person. Not now, not ever. That you are constantly becoming. And part of the becoming is the wearing down of the ego.
Woo.
It is the mountain of your ego needs to be worn down. And you have to understand who you are, not in the context of being separate from the world, but being just one more element of a very, very large world that you cannot possibly encompass
Mm.
because you are so very small. It's not just that I'm nobody, everyone is nobody. Everyone is just one piece of a big thing. And although our individual issues are seemingly big and insurmountable to us, in the context of the Northern Lights, in the context of the world, of a mountain range, of a glacier, in the context of the ocean, in context of 8 billion people that live in the world, we're nothing. We're also everything.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That leads me to asking you your permission to dig a little deeper as you are giving your responses. Because a lot of what I do in research is narrative inquiry and just delving into precognition, metacognition. And that may not be something that your book says, but when I'm reading it, it's almost like there's a lot of revelatory moments that bring light. So, like you just said, light came to you, or, you could be walking in light, and it could also be used as an entire metaphor, but you could have been in a lot of what you just gave us was in a dark place, but you used the word light. So I want your permission ahead of time to go ahead and just dig a little deeper as we're going, and being able to spin it a little bit more so that we can get deeper into what this really means for our own lives. Now, when it gets to the word chasing in your book, that's what I was like, what was he chasing? And then when I think of the word chase, I think about tension.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, before we get into the meat, because we're about to get into the meat of these chapters. Okay, especially the one about isolation, which is one I loved a lot. But the talk to us about the title. How did you come with chasing lights? About all the things that you could have named the book, that chase, and was there tension and questions that you had to ask yourself to come to this point to name the book?
A lot of it came from a single scene in the book where I was walking home on a cold winter's night
Okay.
alongside a road. And most of the reality of living in a place like Anchorage, which is the main town in Alaska, it's pretty bleak, really. It's pretty gray. A lot of slush and ice and cars running past, and everything's kind of gray. And I was walking home from work on my, maybe a couple of miles, and pretty cold, middle of winter, dark. And suddenly the Northern Lights started. And it always comes as a surprise when it happens, even though Northern Lights are pretty frequent, 100 nights a year or something like that in Alaska. It's always a bit of a surprise because it's just so big. It goes, it's impossible. Nothing else you see operates that quickly. And so you'll see light move across the sky so much faster than anything we can see ever. It's these incredible curtains of light that just move so quickly and so dramatically. And it immediately gave me a sense of longing. It snapped me out of whatever it was I was thinking about at that moment. And I just wanted to have it, to have it inside me. And I started running. And through this icy, side of the shoulder of the road and cars going past and chasing after that feeling, that light, that bigness, that expansiveness, wanting
Mm,
it to be a part of me. Ran up a hill that was, this incredible hill and, feeling, tasting the, taste of blood in your mouth because you're running so hard and trying to chase after that light. Um, and then when I finally stopped and just continued walking, everything had changed. Not that I had reached the light completely. I reached after it and it changed where I was. It pulled me out of wherever it was, whatever small place I was, and allowed me to be, even though I was continuing to be small, but I was part of something so much bigger. And suddenly my concerns and whatever sadness or whatever resentment or anger or whatever it was I was feeling at the time went away because what I
Mm.
was doing was getting out of myself and into something that was bigger. And I realized that so much of what happens in our life, we get stuck. It's so easy to get stuck in whatever we're in,
Yeah.
whatever, thing that we're in.
Yeah.
And life constantly presents opportunities for you to get unstuck if you let it,
Mm.
if you chase after the light.
Mm.
Again, you're not going to catch it. You're going to chase it. So, and it's easy to confuse that because I think there are times where people spend a lifetime chasing after something that doesn't give them anything, where
Yeah.
they almost possess then the chase. The chase becomes everything and they get
Yeah.
caught up in that. So it's a dangerous thing for me to say because I think it's a very easy thing to misinterpret. But for me, it was all about that moment, that flash of something that's telling you, hey, this is a big world and you are really small. And the comfort that comes from that, the inspiration that comes from that, the opportunity that comes from that to be something, to be part of something more than just one person.
Yeah. Yeah. That gives me a lot of pause when you're saying that. I mean, I'm not I always say on camera, I'm 40 great instead of 48. I try not to give my age away. But when you go back to parts of this whole dynamic of the chase and the whole part of the dynamic that when you use these words, to me, what you're saying is still be responsible because we're positing to people this notion that you can chase and there is light, but the chase and the light is within and mostly within because the world around us is so big you may never find what you're looking for externally, but when you make the chase and the light internally, it's what comes out and it's what you can actually glean from and live from. And it looks like to me when I read your book, that's what happened. And so therefore we get a chance to enjoy a part of you. So that's why I say thank you for the gift of you because it is so well crafted to me that when you read it, you had to have been somewhere. You had to have had an internal struggle. And so that's why I asked about the tension that can
Mm.
come inside to say that, oh, something was being chased. And what I'm learning from you today so far is that that chase was internal, that became external to the point
Hmm.
where you became the authority, came in an authority figure to write it. Not that you're dominating over anyone, but to write this down so that we can have a path forward as well. Once the book opens with that aspect of your journey to chasing light, there are several chapters that I felt like would be so amazing for you to highlight today. The one is on leaving it all behind. So, in leaving it all behind, you gesture towards the courage it takes to release what no longer serves us. What does it mean in your view to leave something behind in a way that creates space for clear seeing and more intentional living?
Well, I think there's an interesting kind of thought here. Um, we often talk about getting somewhere, right? So we're fighting to get somewhere, or we're reaching to get somewhere, and we think, oh well, we'll get through this bad time, and then I will be there, and then the good stuff will happen. So that's kind of part of the inherent kind of promise that's sitting inside so much of what we do in life is that we go, well, I'll just get through this, and then it'll get better. And actually, it's where you need to where the joy lies is actually already here,
Yeah.
even when things aren't so good. That we talk about the journey being important. Well, the journey is always happening, and you may or may not actually get anywhere, but it's still right here. The enlightenment, the joy, whatever it is wherever you are. At one point, I remember saying to someone because we were struggling through something, and I think someone said, "God, man, this sucks." And the answer is, "Isn't that awesome?"
Wow.
So so leaving it all behind, part of what the realization there for me, and I tried to write it as best I could towards the end of the chapter, is that we didn't leave anything behind.
Ooh.
That we went. I mean, it's somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 miles between Philadelphia and Anchorage, Alaska, and all the things that we left behind were still with us. We moved into a neighborhood in Anchorage, Alaska that looked like any suburban neighborhood that we could have found near Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
It, it just had mountains. It looked a little bit different. We created a cozy little life where, we'd go to school, my father go to work, whatever, it looked kind of the same. It's just we had to wear snow boots a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that I was in adult life. I was leaving behind, living in Chicago as I'd lived for a very long time to move to the DC area. And yet I was still there,
Mm-hmm.
good, bad, indifferent, all the things that I was there. But the journey and exploring something that seemed unknown and finding the familiar even there, isn't that awesome?
Mm-hmm.
It's still broken. It's still weird. It's still hard. You still deal with your own imperfections and maybe other people being jerks or dangerous or, whatever they might be. But isn't it awesome that leaving it all behind is kind of an illusion?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a useful one. Sometimes it's a break. It helps us kind of reboot, if you will. But it is an illusion. Um, the break is not necessarily what gets you where you need to be, but the break can allow you to notice that what you're looking for is right there.
Ooh.
It's always there,
Yeah.
no matter how bad it is. And you read these stories of people that have been through horrific environments. Maybe they've been imprisoned or they've been in, terrible situations, and yet they're able to find grace right here.
Mm-hmm.
It's always there. Some people do it in terms of religious terms, and they talk about, the spirit and God and however they define that, higher powers and everything else. It's always right there, always right there. Sometimes people talk about it philosophically. I mean, I guess Buddha discovered, the meaning of life and enlightenment, sitting under a tree. Didn't matter where he was or what he was doing. One of the things that I found particularly useful for me as someone that has dealt with depression at different times in my life
Mm-hmm.
is learning that no matter how gray and ugly and difficult something might be around you, that just looking for and trying to figure out where the beauty is in any moment, in any scene. You could be in a hideous old parking lot somewhere in the middle of a bad neighborhood and still find beauty. You can find beauty in the ugliest airport in the world, I guarantee it. Every single airport, you can find something beautiful and amazing. Um, it doesn't matter where you are. You don't even have to be, in a mountain vista and be able to see amazing things to be able to have beauty in every single moment in your life. The problem is that when we get stuck, we're not looking. We're
Mm-hmm.
not finding beauty. We have our judgments that are telling us that something can't be beautiful. I mean, we learn to discern and say, well, that's artificial, so that can't be beautiful. Or that's dirty, it can't be beautiful. Or that's a pile of garbage, that can't be beautiful. Well, actually, it all can be, all of it. It's just you. And it's not about climbing a mountain in order to find that. Quite often, it's just a slight adjustment of the lens, and then suddenly you see, oh, wait a minute, here it is right next to me. So you never leave it behind, but the act of trying to leave it behind can sometimes get you to wake up and see what's right there.
Oh. This leads to the next chapter of the book, the value of garbage. So those who are listening into the podcast, Gunnar is giving us deeper insights into what it means to chase light, metaphorically as well as in your real reality, and just bringing you up to speed that when you are in any type of situation and you are faced with these struggles, I love when he said, it sucks. If someone says it sucks, our response can be, but isn't that awesome? And because it is the process of what it really means to chase the light, chase your soul, chase what is missing. which is the tendency. But when he talks about leaving it behind, it's so refreshing to know that that's not exactly what we're doing. We are literally still grappling, we are still growing, we're still transforming, we're still changing, and we're going someplace that is going to lead us to a greater light. If this is your venture, what you're trying to do. Now, Gunnar, let's go to the next part of the conversation on the value of garbage, because it sounds like this is what you were alluding to when you finished your last statement on that question. So the chapter titles just suggest to me about reorientation and how when you talked about that joy is just right there. It reminds me of a part where my dad was a minister. My dad died, but he would talk about how change is only 18 inches away, which is from your heart to your head. So from the measurements from here to here, it's 18 inches. I beg to differ if we pull out a ruler. But the point is, this reorientation that we're talking about, finding meaning or insights in what we often discard or overlook. That was profound to me. So that's why I wanted to know, how do you understand the value of garbage? And what can leaders learn from the parts of life or work that feels messy, unwanted, and inconvenienced?
Yes, I think garbage is one of those things that we need to embrace. We need to understand it now, and we have a problem right now in that we're drowning in our own garbage. You know, literally. I mean, we've got this problem around the world, and the U.S. is just one part of the world that has trouble with garbage. Part of what was happening in the 1970s is we were trying to get away from garbage. Part of, I think, what pulled us in 1970 to move to Alaska was, can we get away from all the garbage? And some of that's metaphorical, some of it's actual, you know, the pollution in the streams and rivers and, you know, you walk through a park and you're just constantly walking through wrappers and stuff like that. And it's just terrible. And the idea that and the air is, you know, polluted and everything else. But part of the dream of Alaska and places like that is you go to a place where the air is pure and where the landscape is untouched by human beings and where you're not going to see all that. And the reality is you do still.
Yeah.
And we all live on one planet. So that means whatever air is being polluted in Beijing is going to end up in Anchorage, Alaska. It's the same air, the same water that we all share. So the garbage is always there. So at first, there's this kind of tragic feeling of like, oh man, here I am. I'm, you know, hundreds of miles away from civilization. There's no one around, and yet here's garbage. Where's that garbage? Why is that there? Where am I finding it here? You look at some sort of animal nest or den, and you see insulation that the animals are creating from garbage that they've discovered, from human garbage. Garbage dumps are a place that a lot of wild animals love. You know, there's all sorts of interesting things for them to find. But when I was living out in the bush, one of the things that was interesting too is that the garbage dump, and you know, if you're out in the wilderness, that garbage dump is a valuable tool. That's where you throw stuff that you don't know what to do with it. But then, man, I need something that'll help me fix this thing. And you can't go to the hardware store. You can't go online and order something. Well, wait a minute. Maybe I can find it in that garbage heap. I can find something I can bend and make it work and somehow make something better. That the garbage dump is valuable. There's something there. And even as something moves from being perfect for the initial purpose, as it decays and turns into something else, it can become valuable for another purpose. And that is interesting to me. And it's something that certainly Alaska continued to teach me, is that there were all these throwaways that we were picking up and using for something else. Now, the U.S. military was very active in Alaska during World War II. A lot of people don't realize that it's the only part of the U.S. that was actually occupied during World War II was a couple of islands in the Aleutian chain in Alaska. So we had a very large military presence in the United States, which meant we had a lot of garbage left over from the U.S. military. And all the surplus stuff that was just lying around everywhere became the building blocks for the life that we had, whether it was old oil drums or it was old, Army surplus equipment, would get repurposed and we'd use it because it's what was lying around. And even within that, you could look at that and go, well, how awful and what garbage. And, you go to, maybe some poorer countries where they're recycling our T-shirts that we've thrown away. They've recycled old tennis shoes and they've learned how to use it in different ways. And some of that's tragic. Some of that's hard. We are burying the world in our throwaways, in this throwaway culture. But what would happen if we could figure out how best, not just to reuse things and do things in a, kind of a sad way where we're constantly patching our genes forevermore, but instead discovering the beauty in garbage. And one of the best metaphors for that for me is that I was entranced as a kid the first time I saw sea glass. What are these incredible stones, the colored stones that you find on the beach? Oh, they're beautiful. And you'd hold them up to the light. They were red and green and yellow and all these beautiful colors. Like, this must be some sort of precious stone. No, it was just broken bottles that had been battered by the sea until they became these beautiful, translucent stones. And really, when you think about it, glass is just sand that's been changed into glass. And then eventually it turns into pebbles and sand again. How beautiful and how striking, and something that you can cherish. What we need to do, yes, we need to throw less away. We need to be able to be smarter about what we're doing, but we also need to find the beauty in something that has been thrown away. What is a weed? We get rid of weeds. We worry about dandelions in a lawn, or we worry about some, vacant lot that's just overgrown with weeds, and everyone just, tut, tut, that's a terrible thing. Well, those weeds are just really successful plants.
Yes.
And if we can look at them and see the beauty in them, maybe instead of trying to get rid of them with pesticides or whatever, or breaking work to get rid of them all, can we accommodate them and understand the beauty of them? So one of the things I love to do, and I really like, beautiful men's clothing, right? So I like wearing suits, which no one else in the world likes to wear apparently anymore.
Right.
So it just makes it harder for me to find a good suit. But one of the things that I like, there's very little men's jewelry that's appropriate, although that's changing, where more men wear more jewelry. But things like cufflinks, no one really thinks about, but it's this wonderful kind of subtle jewelry, or a simple bracelet. But my favorite stuff that I would wear, it's not something that has a diamond on it or something that's really expensive. It's pieces of garbage. So one of the things that I like to wear, I happen to be wearing today, is just a strap of cord that has an old bicycle chain link on it.
Wow.
It's just a piece of garbage, but I think it's lovely and it means something to me.
Mhm.
But that attitude for me is where I find joy. So again, we can look at it physically, but we can also look at it metaphorically. There's lots of junk in my life. There's lots of junk in your life. Things that, gosh, we'd rather not even think about. We just want to throw them away. But is there a way for us to look at it and go, hey, wait a minute, that makes for a lovely bracelet.
Mhm.
That makes for an interesting part or quirky part of who we are and where we're going.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, what's a memoir but recycling of garbage?
Mhm. Would you say the same thing going into the book chapters on Into the Wilderness, Isolation and Belonging, Privilege and Consequences are all tied into that same it sounds like a philosophy in a way. I know it's a montage of stories, lived experiences, a montage of amazing encounters, but it sounds like to me that's also what went into those particular book chapters. Would you agree? Because we talked about leaving it behind, leaving it all behind. We also talked about the value of garbage. And to me, what you just talked about rounds out the other chapters that are my favorites that would bring us to the same revelation.
Well, I think a lot of my experience growing up there was of isolation. On top of that, my exposure to the world outside of that area of Alaska was an experience of not necessarily belonging, not being obvious, of being a stranger, of having a background and an experience that was different from people around me. And now I think a lot of people feel out of place, like they don't belong in whatever situation they find themselves in. I think that's a common experience. And I think isolation is a common experience.
Mhm.
But I do think that some of the kind of profound and extreme feelings of isolation that you can have when the nearest road is 30 miles away, it's very obvious. It's hard not to see it. It's hard not to see, oh my gosh, there's no one around. There's no one to talk to. There's no neighbors. I was fortunate. I grew up in a relatively large family with 4 kids, so there was someone to talk to. There was that kind of environment, but I longed for more. I longed for more people to connect to, and it was interesting to me in some circumstances where I found connection. beyond the family was in odd places, like the radio. There's a passage in the book where we're out in the bush and talking about there was a radio station that you could hear almost everywhere, that you could get to in Alaska, and it was a country western station. And I'm not a big fan, and I wasn't then of country music, but at night the announcer would start reading letters. And these were
Mm.
letters. Someone was maybe in a camp out in the middle of nowhere and would send in a letter so that they could let everyone know at home that they were fine. Or someone at home would write a letter to someone that was somewhere on an oil rig or something like that to be able to say, well, Bobby hit a home run in a baseball game, and we're excited to see you come home next week, and all those sorts of things. So basic, just messages that are human. But something about it on a dark night, with just the sound of the radio and an announcer, not being very emotional, but very warm and kind, reading a letter from one person to another, and somehow feeling connected, even though it was people I didn't know and, they didn't know me. But this idea of being connected together as one larger group of people
Mm.
was profound, even for a young kid. That part of what part of what I find interesting, and I write about it a bit in the book, is that the separation between the wilderness and the country and the city, the separation that people are obsessed with right now, where one side thinks the other side is a bunch of terrible people, is a false separation. That the differences between us are not as great as people think. And I come at this as someone who comes from the sticks. I come from as far away as you can get in some ways. I'm a country boy by definition, but I've spent most of my life in some of the largest cities in the world. And that experience certainly has taught me that whatever people say about the other can also be applied to themselves.
Mm.
Hank Williams Jr., back in I think it was the late 80s, wrote a song called Country Boy Can Survive.
Okay.
And in it, he tells a story of some condescending friend of his that lived in New York City that was very successful, and really kind of looked down his nose at Hank Williams, or whoever the character in the song is, but was mugged by someone in New York and died. And he, on the one hand, is angry and resentful about his friend, but also sees his friend as someone who's been victimized by the city, as opposed to where he paints a picture of the country as being a place where people are more polite and respectful and can also take care of themselves and fix things and defend themselves and, inherently more virtuous. And my experience in both areas is, well, in the country, I've known quite a few people who are not very bright and can't take care of themselves and are, very aggressive and hurt other people. I've seen more guns in the country than I ever saw in the city, more violence. But in the city, I've certainly seen people that are compassionate and can take care of themselves and are very focused on community and helping each other. They're both the same.
Mm.
You've got both in both places.
Mm.
The country and the city are not different. What we're saying to ourselves is a false story. When I was living in Alaska, I was reading books and seeing television shows and movies and listening to the radio that was based on something that happened in New York or Los Angeles or London or Paris. I was a consumer of the world, even though I was in the middle of nowhere. The
Mm.
food I ate, a lot of it was shipped from somewhere else and was processed in cities. The clothes I wore, the car we drove, all of this came from somewhere else. I was part of the city, even though I was physically somewhere else. Just as Hank Williams Jr. lives in the city or lived in the city,
Mm.
even though he was out, I don't know where he was, out in the country. It's just a neighborhood in the city. The city is us. The city is civilization. It's other people. And with that comes good and bad things. We're all the same in all these areas. I love that, going back to hero worship here, going back to Barack Obama, when he talked about there's no red state or blue state. We're all purple. It I think that's an important insight for us to realize that the differences that we augment and we cast aspersions to someone else as a group of people, not only are they corrosive and toxic, but they're not true. It's just not true. People on the left are not all crazy communists. People on the right are not all freaked out gun nuts. We're just people. And you can find examples of people that are nuts, that are difficult, that are having a hard time, that are broken. And you can also find a lot of people that are doing amazing things at every single level. And that's a lot of what I learned from being from somewhere else and having the experience of experiencing the modern world as a stranger, as coming, reading about it, watching it, thinking about it, not really being in it. And then, you can imagine some Alaskan kid walking down the streets of New York for the first time. Oh my goodness. I mean, it's mind blowing, that experience. But it also means once you've done that, once you've experienced the new world, you can now look back at the old world and understand it better. And that's basically been my experience and what I tried to write about.
Yes. Well, we're down to our very last question. And I think it's one of the most beautiful places to end. And it is the chapter that says first kiss, first city, first love, and first goodbye. When I'm reading the chapter, it's about evoking the tenderness of beginnings and the ache that we have when we have to end stuff. Even if it's not our choice, stuff ends, life ends, plans end. And that is not something we think about. I wanted our audience to hear directly from you. How do early experiences of wonder and connection and loss shape the way we learn to pay attention? And how do they influence the way we pursue light as the life goes on beyond what we thought our circumstances would be?
One of the things that always surprises me is that we think of these things as being one and done.
Hold on. Say it again. Say that one more time.
We think of experiences, both negative and positive, as being one and done, where I'm going to fall in love and these amazing things happen. And it was a surprise. I didn't expect to have this feeling, these experiences, this incredible person. And then if that ends, it's over. I'll never have that again. You hear yourself saying things like that all the time. I do, idiotic things like that I'll say, but everyone does. No, other things will keep happening. Life keeps rolling along. It's not a question of you finding the next stage in your life. It's going to happen whether you realize it or not. The only option you have is to keep it from happening. And that, unfortunately, is an option that we all take more often than we'd like. So the way we keep it from happening is we get attached to the tragedy. We get attached to the drama. I'm miserable. Everything fell apart.
Come on.
I will always be ruined. It will never happen again. And that's a narrative. That's a lie that we tell ourselves. I don't know why exactly. I don't know why we find it comforting, but we do on the near term. There's something about the identity of being the wronged one. Think about all the songs about, he done me wrong or she done me wrong that are out there. Maybe that's why I don't like country music. But it's false and we're always surprised. Oh my goodness, something good happened again. Or we're surprised by, oh my goodness, things were rolling along and this terrible thing happened. What a surprise. Why did this happen to me? And it didn't. It just happened. Yeah. And quite often, terrible things happen, not because someone's out to get you, although that happens too, but quite often it's simply because it fell apart. It simply is the order of things that we are constantly changing. The world is constantly changing. We love to say that as if we have a handle on that. Like I love when consultants say, change is the only constant and therefore we have to blah, 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 whatever. And everyone nods their heads and feels very, self-satisfied and intelligent by saying, well, I acknowledge that change is a thing that happens and blah, blah, blah. And yet we still go back to these models in our minds of change being an aberration. It's not. And, stability and things being exactly as we planned it is an aberration. And we have to switch our thinking, I think, to that. So as we go through life and as we experience wonderful things and terrible things, we have to understand that's just what they are, that they will pass through us. The hardest thing in the world is to let go of it. The hardest thing in the world is to let the next thing happen. So I had to say goodbye to my first love. That was awful. Hurt. Oh, I longed for it to be some other way. But believe it or not, love happened again in a different way. Something good happened after that. And it continues to happen. But if I stayed attached to the tragedy, if I stayed attached to the loss and the longing, we have to go through a grieving process. It's not like I can pretend that those feelings don't happen. That tends to, by the way, make them last longer. If I pretend that I'm not bummed about something, I'm going to really get bummed about something. But if I face it, if I look at it and go, oh, this is something that was hard, and I feel terrible about it. Let's look at that, understand it, and at some point say, okay, I'm done. I'm ready for the next thing, whatever that next thing is. And by the way, that next thing is not necessarily going to be great. It could be awful, but
Okay.
you have every chance that it will also be great. There's both that's happening. And by the way, the determination that something is good or bad has everything to do with how you look at it. I don't know, not a lot of people, some people love it, some people don't. I love spicy food. I love things that are really hot that hurt.
Okay.
But what's weird about that is, what on earth am I doing causing myself physical pain? Why do I find that to be a good thing? Now, there's reasons for that, endorphins and, what it does to you, just like going running will make you feel good. You'll feel high, things like that. Hot peppers will do the same thing to you. But part of determining whether or not eating a pepper is a good experience is how I approach it. If I look at it as, oh no, I'm going to hurt myself, I'm going to feel pain. If instead I'm going, oh, I'm going to feel some pain, but this is going to be exciting. And there's going to be something good that happens at the end, or I'm going to experience flavor in a different way and in a way that's not necessarily comfortable. So it depends on how you look at it. Oh yeah, bad things are going to happen to me. I'm going to be disappointed. Can I look at that in a way and understand in the moment, not even worrying about getting to the next day when it's going to be better, but looking at it right now and go, okay, all right, this sucks.
Yeah.
Isn't that awesome?
Yes.
I'm here. I'm alive.
I love it. I love it. I think one of the most superb parts of this is, if you would like to, this podcast allows you to say hello to your wife. And if you want to say anything to her, if she should watch this, this is a good time. My husband and I, we're celebrating 20 years of marriage, and in a couple of more weeks. And everybody that comes to my podcast, I give them the floor if they want to say anything, or give a shout out for this new found love, this new round of something great that came out of something that wasn't so great.
And congratulations, that's wonderful.
Thing.
What is amazing to me about my wife, Mia, who is wonderful on so many different levels,
Hi, Mia.
and I actually said this in the dedication of the book, is right from the beginning, her unrelenting joy,
Yeah.
her ability to find delight in spaces that I didn't know there was delight.
Hmm.
So to a certain extent, it's an ongoing discovery process and learning process as she and I are enjoying this stage in life where there's grandchildren, where there's new experiences, even as our knees might hurt a little bit more when we go upstairs. But she is the most joyful human being I think I've ever met, and I am so grateful that we found each other.
Well, your whole voice changed, your face changed, like you just melted just now. So I hope she can see this, and this will be a permanent artifact of how well she changed it. And to me, that's a version of chasing light. Mia, to me, represents chasing light. What products can come out of these moments and these encounters if we can just hold on, if we can just holding on. Gunnar, it is so hard holding on. But one of the things I was doing while I was typing up our thing of our time together was saying, it is gonna happen, like your name. It's gonna happen. This thing is gonna happen for me. So your chasing light is spreading so much hope more than you possibly know. And this audience is majority Harvard, but it's my family, my people that I talk to on the phone, and they are hurting today, right now. It's not something we have to muster up and then go out and then say, oh, pick up this book the next time you find yourself. No, this is a relevant time. And in the Black church, we say a right now word. This is something that can happen for your life. And so I want to make sure my audience knows as we end it. So from what we've gathered at the table of redemption today is chasing light reminds us that even in seasons of disorientation, turbulence, and profound uncertainty, there is a way to move forward with intention. So Gunnar Branson, who sat here with me today and who was so kind to me during my time at Harvard, and Harvard event, has shown us that clarity is not an accident. It's a practice. And when we learn to pay attention with greater honesty and humility, we begin to see possibilities that were hidden in plain sight. So his insights today offer more than reflections to me. They offer direction for me. They invite us to slow down, to notice that we've been overlooked or that we have overlooked things, and to rebuild our inner architecture with much more care than you have. Now, I want to ask you, what are you leaving the table of redemption with today?
Well, what a joyous conversation. I do think that redemption, I have a few images of the Buddha that I cherish. The ones that I cherish the most are when he's laughing.
Oh.
And when he's dancing. So you and I met dancing, trying to get out of each other's way. That's what this conversation is. And ultimately, I think what became clear, especially you telling the story of us meeting again, that redemption is laughter and dancing. Redemption is goofiness.
Yes.
Redemption is taking that garbage and going, this sucks. Isn't that awesome?
And what words do you have from me as I continue on my journey to bringing this podcast to the world, helping them find redemption?
Keep walking.
Okay. Keep chasing the light.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much, Gunnar, for joining us here today. Everyone, Chasing Lights is on every shelf that you can find. I'll post the information in the description so that you can have access to it. I hope that you have been well fed at this table of redemption. I hope that you ordered what you want, that meaning that your goals, your dreams, and your aspirations, that you can find yourself in any aspect of what we have discovered on today. It's been intentional that we didn't get through all the chapters so that you can go buy the book on your own and be able to join in the conversation. Find Gunnar on his LinkedIn page. Find him on, he has an AFIRE podcast, to be able to find yourself in this work and do your own work as well. I am signing off as Rasheen Jamison-Richardson, your podcast host and founder, Harvard alumni, and it has just been a pleasure to be here with you today. Bye-bye. That was a wonderful, wonderful interview with Gunnar Branson. I hope that everyone that is watching this, you dream big. If you want to write a book, write the book. If you want to go on a vacation, go on a vacation. If you want to lay crawled up with a blanket, crying over what the turbulence that's happening, do that. But guess what? Continue chasing your